catastrophic situation is playing out in Australia.
The smoke visible from space.
A New Year's Eve crisis going into 2020.
People are telling us this is the worst they've ever seen. The fires have burned more intensely, more ferociously. They seem to have a mind of their own.
Satellite imagery is showing that Arctic sea ice is at its lowest levels on record.
In northern Siberia, it hit 100.4 degrees.
We are looking right now at the all-time record heat for the month of June.
The catastrophic Category 4 hurricane bearing down on the U.S.
The increased temperature has reached a crucial point. Based on BBC analysis, in the last decade, the maximum temperature has increased by 0.5 degrees Celsius compared to the long term in 1980 to 2009. It seems that it has a small impact, increase only 0.5 degrees, but the slightest increase in the temperature can threaten human life. Global warming needs to be prevented. Generally, global warming is caused by high level of carbon dioxide. The bad news is that the internet that we use every day accounts for 4% of the total carbon dioxide produced globally. Especially during a pandemic like this, our activities are done completely online. It is undeniable that the internet has become an inseparable part of human life. Even the number of internet users around the world has reached 4.5 billion people. This means that internet usage has reached more than 60% of the world population. The data show how big the influence of the internet is on our Earth. In this case, we saw an opportunity to express the 7th SDG, which is affordable and clean energy. The internet usage needs energy and eventually lead to global warming. This topic also relates to the 13th SDG, which is climate action. The question is, how does the internet affect global warming?
You need to know. Applications can also produce carbon emissions, starting from social media to streaming apps. Applications can generate more carbon emissions based on the energy used. And in fact, about 60% of these applications do not use renewable energy, which can have a big impact on our daily life. We compared the results of our research with several websites such as the BBC and Indonesian ESDM, and it is proven that applications and the internet have a big impact on CO2 growth. One of these applications is Twitter. Such applications can generate a lot of pollution in a short period of time. As a result, in these days, carbon emissions have multiplied many times and could increase by almost 1% every day. The calculation that we have made based on the website Internet Live Stats on October 7, 2021 regarding carbon emissions can reach 2,500 tons per minute. However, Google and Facebook in this regard are one step ahead. They are already implementing renewable energy. So, 10 out of 10 applications developed by Google and Facebook currently have a good environmental carbon emission value.
Applications have a relationship with global warming. The application and browser that we use will send data to the data center, so we can open them. The data is connected by cables, switches, and routers that are under the sea. The delivery is like a traffic highway under the internet. The data center will need energy to send the data back to our devices. The energy is generated in different ways with different emissions, such as coal, natural gas, nuclear, and renewable resources. These emissions can deplete the ozone layer and heat the earth. This impact is also the impact of the internet's carbon emissions. Some applications are already using renewable energy, which lowers the level of CO2 emissions, but some are still using dirty energy resources, such as coal, oil, or nuclear. The use of dirty and renewable energy in the data center greatly affects the result of the emissions released. The thickness of carbon in the electricity grid, based on the international average of the International Energy Agency, is 475 grams of CO2 emission per kilowatt hour, which means that every 1,000 watts of electricity consumed in 1 hour will produce 475 grams of CO2, like the weight of 8 normal-sized eggs. And for renewable energy, based on data for wind energy from Ecotricity, is 33.4 grams CO2 emissions per kilowatt hour, lighter than an egg. Due to that, it's important to replace data center resources. But that's not something we can do, right? We can reduce emissions by changing apps we use. For further discussion, we set it up in the applicable solution section. This year's traffic data has grown more than 3 times since 2015. Therefore, the resulting emissions must have also increased. Earth produced 39.9 billion tons of CO2 emissions per year, and the IT sector is responsible for 4% of it, or as much as 1.5 billion tons of CO2. Indonesia itself is the 4th country which has the most internet users and is responsible for 1.4% of the world's total emissions.
One of the most pollution-emitting applications is YouTube, which is watched up to 1 billion times per day, producing 6 billion grams of carbon emissions per day. Although YouTube has used renewable energy so that the emissions are not 100% and sustainably returned to the carbon cycle, the emissions are still large and have an impact on global warming. We have found a newest technology to capture carbon. It is called Carbon Capture, Utilization and Storage, or CCUS. It is the process of capturing carbon that has been released into the air to be utilized into a new product. CCUS is divided into two: conversion and non-conversion. Conversion means that CO2 is converted into a new form or product in 3 ways: mineralization, biologically, and chemically. Meanwhile, CCUS by non-conversion are desalination and enhanced oil recovery. An example of CCUS that has launched is Orca. On September 8, 2021, ClimateWorks launched Orca, a climate-positive direct air capture and storage plant. This facility has the capacity to capture 4,000 tons of CO2 in a year, but for now, this facility is only located in Iceland. How Orca works in a nutshell is to capture air and filter it so that clean air is released. The captured CO2 will be processed and stored underground in stones after going through the mineralization process. Through this method, it is hoped that 4,000 tons of CO2 in a year can be stored permanently underground.
So, we want to make people aware of the impact of using the internet as we explained earlier. We offer several effective ways to reduce carbon emission from the internet we use. Since we want to make people realize the impact of excessive internet use, and most of internet users are teenagers, especially during a pandemic, we want to voice the solution through social media. We will raise awareness through project or campaign with social media, for example, through feeds or Instagram stories, through YouTube by working with famous YouTubers, and WhatsApp by using broadcast. This week we have distributed templates on how excessive internet usage affects the environment around us through Instagram feeds and stories and WhatsApp broadcasts. Apart from uploading, we also invite our online friends to help spread it through social media as well. Second, when we have collected 200 people who spread this awareness, then we will do a higher actions, such as a collaboration with influencers on Instagram and YouTubers. By collaborating with them, we can enlighten the followers of the influencer through the contents they upload. Third, or the last, with this kind of collaboration, this program has a very big impact for many people who have awareness of the impact of excessive internet use.